and welcome to Module 2, where we're going to be getting into the meat of this whole course. We're going to be going over the 4 different types of questions that you will be getting asked during your interview, and we're going to be starting out with the who questions. Essentially, what they're going to want to know with the who questions is, who, in your own words, are you? But before we get going, let's recap a little bit about what we went over in the last module. The last module, we went over everything that you need to know leading up to the interview. We went over the 3 best ways to prepare for the interview, what exactly you want to be wearing when you're at the interview, and what you want to bring. We went over everything that has to do with your personal portfolio and what you need in it. So if you've never been in a fire interview before, or you're kind of new to this whole process, the who questions, they're going to be asking who you are in your own words. They've probably done a background check on you already, and they have a generic idea, and they maybe have even talked to some of your references and found out a little bit about who you are and where you've worked and what you've done. But the who questions are meant to get a deeper understanding of what stresses you out, what you're like, what you do in your free time. So here's some good principles to keep in mind when answering these questions, and really for the most part, any of the questions. First things first, when they ask you something about yourself, they don't want a long answer about your family and where they're from and what they did. Answer the question. Stick with relevant information. Next, when they're asking you who questions, and we'll get into some specific examples of these later on, this is one of the best times to reference your personal experience and really tell a story from your past. This is the time, these are the types of questions where you have the opportunity to stand out and be unique and tell a memorable story that they'll remember, that after you leave, they'll remember, oh, this was the guy that told this story, or this was the girl that had this happen to her. 2 to 3 minutes. Definitely don't go beyond that, especially with questions like, so tell us about yourself. Keep it brief. Like I said before, stick to relevant information and answer the question. Also, be honest. Don't try to exaggerate a story or certainly don't tell one that's not true. If you tell a story or talk about experience or something like that that you don't have, and one of the officers or somebody on that panel knows that that's not true or has experience with that and questions you on it, and you show that you don't actually know what you're talking about, or they know that that's not true, you have ruined your chances of getting hired. If you lie in the interview, you're done. So be honest. Finally, be humble. If you have a great resume, if you have tons of fire experience, you have a college degree, you've got it all, don't come in there and be arrogant. Don't act like you know everything. Some of these people that are going to be interviewing you have been fighting fires longer than you've probably been alive. So come in there with the right attitude, a humble attitude of somebody that's willing to learn. Question I get all the time is, what if I don't have a perfect background? Maybe you have a DUI charge in the past, or a minor misdemeanor from years ago, or have some records sealed or something like that. What do you do if you don't have a perfect background? Well, let me start out by saying that if you have already made it to the panel interview, they've already done a background check on you. And if they've already done a background check on you, they know about whatever criminal record you have. So knowing that you have some sort of charge in your past and you've still made it all the way there is a really good sign that they're still willing to take the time to interview you and look at you as a potential candidate for the department. So you're on the right track. So first, be honest. Obviously, they already know about it. So if asked about it, be honest about it. Next, take 100% responsibility for whatever happened. Let's say you had a DUI, because that's a pretty common question I get. If you had a DUI, do not try to pass the blame onto somebody else that, well, somebody had my keys, or I had to be somewhere in the morning, so I had to drive home. Take 100% responsibility. Say, yes, I did do that. Yes, it was stupid. Yes, it was a mistake. No, it has never happened since, and it will never happen again. You see, responsibility is one of the pillars in the fire service. You're not only responsible to your officers and the other firefighters and the citizens, you have to take responsibility for every action that you take. So if they sense during your interview that you're trying to pass blame onto somebody else or a situation and not take responsibility for your actions and your mistakes and what you did, that will look really, really, really bad for you. Third, action is king. Just saying that you made a mistake doesn't show that you've really learned from it. You need to tell them or show them somehow what sort of actions you've taken since then to make sure you never repeat that. Maybe, again, let's use the example of the DUI. Maybe took on the role of a mentor to somebody else, or maybe you joined some sort of group. Maybe you recognize that you had a little bit of a drinking problem at some point, so you have permanently stopped drinking. Tell them that. Tell them what sort of actions that you've taken since then to change, and that you've learned and that you've grown from the mistake that you made. Finally, if you're not asked about it, don't bring it up. Now, this is a point of contention for a lot of people. A lot of people feel like if they don't say anything about it, they're hiding something or they're lying, but that's not true. Like I said, if you've made it to the interview and they've already done a background check on you, they know about it. And if they don't ask you about it, there's no point in talking about it. The point of the interview, remember, is to make you look like the best candidate, the best choice of all the other dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of other candidates out there. You need to make yourself look as good as possible, as the best choice for them. So bringing up a mistake in the past that they already know about, reminding them about that, and obviously it's not that much of an issue to them, is going to do nothing but make you look worse. So if you're not asked, don't bring it up. Now that we've covered some of the principles of the who questions and how to handle any questions that may be thrown at you if you have a bad background, what exactly does the panel want to hear? Well, like I've said before, they want to know more about you. They want to know your qualifications. They want to know things like, what kind of education do you have? How'd you do in high school? What'd you do in high school? And not necessarily just on paper education. Did you participate in sports? What other activities were you involved in? What sort of qualifications do you have to be a firefighter? What kind of skills do you have? Things like that. What have you done since high school? Did you go to college? If you didn't go to college, what did you do? Did you join the military? They want to know more about your qualifications. They also want to know what sort of healthy outlets you have. So how do you spend your free time? As a firefighter, you are going to be put in stressful situations, and you are going to see some rather disturbing things at some point in your career. Dealing with depression and dealing with difficult situations is a real thing. So they want to know that you have healthy outlets. Maybe you work out all the time. Maybe you lift weights. Maybe, I don't know, whatever your outlets are, they want to know that they're healthy and that it's not going to cause a problem for you or the department down the road. Also, they want to know that you're willing to learn. Like I said kind of in the beginning, you may have a great resume, but trust me, as a firefighter, you will never stop learning. There will always be something new to know about. So they want to know that you're coming in there with the right attitude, and a good attitude as someone that's here and that is teachable and willing to learn. So let's get into some sample questions. What I've done is I've picked out 3 questions in each of the 4 categories. Ones that tend to give people a hard time, ones that people seem to struggle with the most. The first one that I've picked out in the who category is, so, tell us about yourself. This question will usually come right at the beginning of the interview. This is usually how they'll start it out. And before you even get into answering the question, the first thing that you want to do is you want to thank them for their time and for the opportunity to sit before them today and interview with them. After that, some key principles for this question you'll want to keep in mind is keep it brief. They're not interested in hearing about what you did in elementary school. They want later in life, more relevant life experience and more relevant education. So don't go on and on and on for 5 minutes. A lot of people get hung up there, so be careful and time yourself when you're practicing. Next, stay on topic. Again, they're asking about you. They're not interested in hearing about your family or your friends or what they do. If they want to know about that, they'll ask you about that. But for this question, make sure you stay on topic. Now, it's a very broad question, so it's easy to stray a little bit. But when you practice, make sure you're on topic. Finally, things that you're going to want to talk about is you're going to want to cover your relevant education, whether it be school education or maybe it's some sort of technical education or some sort of on-the-job training, any sort of job experience, or maybe even life experience leading up to where you are at that present time sitting in front of them for the interview. Next, what do you feel is your biggest strength and what do you feel is your biggest weakness? Now, the strength, people typically don't have that hard of a time with that. It's easy to come up with something. Everybody likes to talk about themselves and everybody likes to make themselves sound good. So people don't typically struggle that much with what their strength would be. Me, when I was in my interviews, I believe that the strength that I noted was my ability to persist. When I was in high school and college and onward, I was a soccer player. And what I always wanted to do my entire life was be a professional athlete. And everybody always told me that I couldn't, that I wasn't good enough, and things like that all the time. Well, I noted in my interviews that I was persistent. and that I never gave up, and that I ignored what other people had to say and kept working to get towards my goal, and eventually I did. So that was my strength. Your weakness, this is where I typically get questions from people, is I don't know what to say for my weakness. I don't want to make myself sound too bad, but at the same time, I don't want to give some silly answer that really actually isn't a weakness. So my advice to you is keep your weakness generic. Keep it something that, sure, you may struggle with, but it's kind of something that everybody in one way or another struggles with. A better way to illustrate this would be an example. When I was in my interviews, what I noted as my weakness was my inability, or sometimes that I would struggle with, staying organized. Now, when I was going through paramedic school and fire school and leading up to the interviews and whatnot, I was in paramedic school full time. I was working 2 jobs, and I was finishing my bachelor's degree online. So I was really, really busy. So I believe the way I phrased my weakness was, sometimes I struggle with staying organized. Due to the fact that I'm so busy with school and work, it's tough for me to stay organized, but because I am so busy, I've had the opportunity to work on it, and I've improved greatly over the last year or so. So think about your own life. Think about things that you've done. What would you say is a strength for yourself, and what would you say is a weakness that is kind of generic? Again, if you have a serious character flaw or something like that, this might not be the time to bring that up, because you're trying to make yourself sound as good as possible. So stick to something that's generic, that everybody kind of struggles with, but make sure that you follow up with, but I've been working on it and I've improved greatly, and this is evident in this way. The last of the 3 questions that I've picked out is, how do you deal with stress? And another similar question that you may get is, what are your hobbies? When they ask you questions like this, they're kind of going after 2 things. Number 1, they want to see what your outlets are. So as a firefighter, like I mentioned before, you will be put in stressful situations. You will see some disturbing things at some point in your career. I can almost guarantee it. They want to know that when things like that happen, that you deal with them appropriately, that you don't spend your time at the bar and you don't participate in unhealthy activities. Maybe you deal with stress by working out. Maybe you go fishing. Maybe you do yoga. I don't know. Whatever it is that you like to do in your free time, that's what they're trying to find out. The other reason that they'll ask you something like that is they want to know what you're like off duty. They want to see if you'll fit in with the dynamic of the group. Where I work, there's a lot of guys that like to go hunting and fishing. Me personally, it's not my thing. I'm more of into working out. And there's a lot of guys that I work with that are very, very active, do triathlons, run marathons, and things like that. So this is another question that trips people up a lot. They're not sure exactly how to answer about how to deal with stress. Talk about whatever your hobbies are and what you do in your free time and things that are healthy outlets. So a couple common mistakes people make, especially with who questions, is number 1, talking too much. Your answers need to be brief and to the point. No more than 2, absolutely no more than 3 minutes for each answer. And that's tough because who questions are typically a little more broad, a little more generic, and they give you a lot of room to talk. So this is where practicing becomes so important. You need to practice, you need to time yourself when you practice and make sure your answers are within 2 to 3 minutes at the most. Second, using generic answers, and this really trips a lot of people up because they'll finish their interview and they think they did a good job, but really they're just a generic candidate. They're just canned answers or answers that everybody kind of has. It's okay to use generic answers. It's okay to have generic education and things like that, but remember, who questions is they want to find out more about who you are. This is your time to shine. This is your time to tell your own story. You'll hear me use this phrase a lot, unique and memorable. This is your time to tell a unique and memorable story. If you use generic answers, that's okay, but you have to follow them up with something that's memorable. And again, like I said, this is where a lot of people get tripped up. They think they gave great answers, but really they're just a bland candidate that just the panel sees over and over. Coming up next, we're going to be getting into the why questions. The questions where the panel wants to find out exactly why you're there and exactly why you want to be a firefighter. Similar to this module, we're going to be going over the basic elements that you want to make sure that you include in your answers. and sample questions and answers. Again, I'm going to pick out 3 that I get a lot of emails or a lot of questions about that seem to give people the hardest time. So we're going to be going over all that with the why questions coming up in Module 3.